So once a year, I try and do a classic 1 week American road trip in the summertime. And this is just a magical experience for me. Hundreds of miles on the road, staying in old motels and just really immersing myself for an extended period of time in the photographic process. In the past, I've gone to the Southwest, I've gone up and down California, and I've gone to the Mountain West. So with that in mind, I figured this time I would turn tail north and head to the Pacific Northwest. To be brief, the Pacific Northwest has it all. It has those green evergreen forests, beautiful snow-covered volcanoes, it has windswept beaches, deserts, rainforests, bustling cities, and breweries. And my goal for this trip was to see it all. As we started our trip off heading northbound to Bend, Oregon, we came within sight of Mount Shasta, and that's just a good indicator that you are in the Pacific Northwest. And I figured that'd also be a good opportunity just to get out there and start shooting. And to keep things interesting, I did bring along my Mamiya 6MF, and in that I loaded up some 35mm Fuji Reala 100, which is an expired film. And I know what you're saying, this is a 120 camera, why are you putting 35mm in it? And because it is the MF version of the Mamiya 6, you can actually put in a Mamiya made panoramic 35mm adapter. So that's exactly what I did. And in many ways, this is like a poor man's version of the XPAN, although it's also really expensive, so I guess it's just the rich man's XPAN. In any case, the Mamiya 6 is a fantastic camera and it has some fantastic lenses, and for this trip I stuck with just the 50mm because that would pretty much give me the wide depth of field as well as just the overall landscape view that I want. 2 shots in and I'm already pretty stoked about bringing along that Mamiya 6. Photographing Mount Shasta almost feels like cheating, honestly, but this is definitely a landscape that thrives in panoramic format. And it also doesn't hurt that I brought along some expired Fuji Reala 100. Of course, this is a film, like many, that Fuji has gotten rid of, and it is a low contrast film that has those iconic Fuji greens, and it should yield some decent landscapes throughout this trip. I also dedicated a whole video to this film stock last year, so if you do want to see that, I will leave a link in the description. As Mount Shasta faded into the distance, I did load up my tried and true Pentax KX with some good old Kodak 200. And it really shouldn't be a surprise I brought the Pentax KX along at this point. It's pretty much super glued around my neck. It feels like an extension of my arm sometimes. And that's what you really want when you're in a squeeze for time and you really have to make the photos count. Given that the light was quite harsh, I didn't really have the highest expectations. I'm never one to really shy away from a quick roadside stop photography opportunity. This section of Northern California and Southern Oregon is one of my favorites to photograph of all time, and what I really need to do is come back here and slow things down and just dedicate a whole little trip to this area. As we made our way into Bend, I did make a quick stop along the Deschutes River to take some photos with the great Cody Mitchell. If you live in a cave and are not familiar with Cody's YouTube channel or his photography, I definitely suggest checking it out ASAP. And of course, a link to his channel is in the description. Although the light was still a little harsh along the Deschutes, the landscape itself was fantastic. If anything, I regret being lazy and not bringing along a tripod or an ND filter just to get some long exposures of the water in the river. After a great time photographing with Cody, I did drive back into Bend for an evening of non-photography related Bend activities. All in all, day one was a pretty successful day photographically speaking. Had a great time with Cody along the Deschutes. Of course, I would like to go back there with a tripod under varying lighting conditions. And then, of course, earlier, driving through all those dusty towns in Southern Oregon, Northern California, yielded some fun results, even if it was in that midday high contrast light. And the funny thing is, my favorite photo from the whole day happened to be the very first, and that was of Mount Shasta. So suffice to say, I'm not regretting bringing that Mamiya 6 along at this point, and I'm really happy to be shooting more 35mm panoramics going ahead. The next morning started with a craft beer induced sense of regret. It was officially day 2 and had many miles yet to cover and a lot of photos yet to take. Our end goal was to reach the foot of Mount Rainier by sunset, but first we had to check out a few crusty, rusty, old Central Oregon towns. The first stop was in Shunico, which I must say is a great spot to visit for anyone in the area, and I'm glad that I had my Mamiya 6 in hand because this was just a great spot to start blasting with that Fujifilm. I was particularly excited about photographing this scene in panoramic format, but in the end the lighting was just a little too harsh. This would be a great composition to revisit and photograph when the lighting's better in the evening or morning. After shooting so many photos of old cars in a row, I did have to go to photography jail, unfortunately. After my sentence was up, I did get at least one interior shot. Because outside light was about 10 stops brighter though, it really didn't come out the best. As we tearfully left the paradise they call Shunico, Oregon, I did load up some Fuji NPC 160 in my Mamiya 6. This is also an expired, extinct film stock, and it's actually more of a portrait stock, which is meant for skin tones. It's higher contrast than Reala 100, and for that reason, many would say it's an unwise choice for the compositions at hand. After a fun 9 hours of driving over 2 days, we finally crossed the Columbia River and into the great state of Washington. To celebrate the occasion, I stopped to find a few compositions along the river, and this is definitely an area I'd love to revisit in the future. The Columbia River Gorge in itself is just loaded with history and loaded with great landscapes. Judging by these first few photos, I will definitely say that this is a more contrasty film than Fuji Reala. Even so, I'm quite happy with the photos, and I can't say that I have any regrets about using Fuji NPC 160. After a couple more hours of driving, we finally found ourselves well into the Cascades and at the base of Rainier National Park. With plenty of time to spare, we cruised up into the park and actually stopped at most of the main attractions around Paradise. And with that photo, I'm officially through with my roll of Fuji NPC 160, and I gotta say I was quite happy with the results. It really delivered up in Rainier with those punchy greens, and the contrast wasn't too bad for just the conditions at hand. It even did those beige landscapes in Oregon fairly well, if you ask me. But for the most part, I'm kind of sad because, of course, Fuji got rid of it, and I'm gonna have a hard time finding it in the future. After shooting what felt like 80 rolls of Gold 200, I finally decided to switch it up to some good old bread and butter Portra 400. This is a film stock that's just fast enough to shoot handheld during golden hour, so that was a no-brainer choice for me. At this point, you might be getting sick of all these photos of Mount Rainier, especially since they're from a commonly photographed area like Paradise, but man, I was having an absolute blast. Nothing beats burning through a bazillion rolls at golden hour, having a brew perhaps just to refresh yourself, and then just taking in the sights. One thing I tried to remember going into this trip was just to shoot more macro and intimate landscapes. Because the Cascades were in pretty much peak bloom at this point, I figured I was pretty lucky in that regard. But of course, I actually went against my wishes here and loaded up some Portra 800 and went for some very, very common compositions of Rainier. With all that being said, I am quite happy with how these common compositions turned out with the Portra 800, and really it was just a successful day in general. We started out in Central Oregon going through the Sagebrush Ocean from dusty town to dusty town, and then at the end of the day we're at the foot of a 14,000 foot glaciated volcano. I mean, just a great day with some literal highs, literal lows. Even with all this driving and all this shooting, I was quite eager to go back to Rainier, so that's why we were back on the road already at 4 a.m. the next morning. Fittingly, the plan was to check out the sunrise in a part of Rainier National Park called Sunrise. A small cloud bank did unfortunately rob the mountain of any alpenglow, but the lighting was quite nice right afterwards. To start the day, I did once again load up some Fuji Reala 100 into my Mamiya 6, and I was also sticking with some Portra 800 in my Pentax KX. Although it sucks donkey tits to sleep 5 hours and wake up at 4 a.m. just to miss out on the alpenglow, it was quite nice to have sunrise practically to ourselves. This is a busy time of year, and you actually need reservations to get into this part of the park, but if you go as early as we did, that tends to not be an issue. After wandering around for a while, we reached a spot along a ridge and hiked along what was undoubtedly one of my favorite views from this whole trip. This is also about the time that I ran on my precious Portra 800, so I did load up some good old Ektar 100. I really wanted them greens to pop, and it was bright enough now where I could get by shooting handheld. Also, be forewarned, I did find a bunch of compositions along this little section of trail here, so I'm going to be really just hammer it from here forward. At this point, the fatigue of travel was really starting to set in. The morning light was slowly starting to turn into that harsh midday light, and I was really just looking forward to have a cold Rainier in the parking lot. Nonetheless, the view was still gorgeous, and I had plenty of film left in my bag. Wrapping up what was undoubtedly one of my favorite hikes of the trip, we did figure it was about time to head to Seattle. And of course, I did stop for a pint along the way to Seattle. And then once I did get to Seattle, I did have a couple Guinnesses with Bray Hunsiger. And then I guess you can see how the night went after that. Day 3 was undoubtedly one for the books. It was a really early morning, really active morning. And then, of course, went to Seattle afterwards. And in that morning span, I feel like I made some really great work with that Portra 800, with that Ektar 100, and with that Fuji Reala 100. And I'm not really having any regrets at this point in the trip. I feel like I'm choosing the right stocks for the most part, but I still have a lot of photos yet to take and a lot of potential mistakes still to make. As day 4 rolled around, we pretty much just had a day of fun in Seattle planned, and I didn't take any photos for the most part, but I still had a great time, did a lot of walking, had a few beers, had some food, and it didn't go to the original Starbucks, but I did get the mac and cheese at Beecher's, and that was good. For day 5, we switched out our city shoes for some hiking boots once again and made our way up the Olympic Peninsula with end goal of going to Hurricane Ridge in Olympic National Park. Along the way, we did stop in the Scandinavian town of Paulsbo, and I gotta say it was a great visit. The bakery and the pastries alone made it a stop worth making, so a special thanks to Bray Hunsiger for the recommendation. After a good bit of driving, we did reach Hurricane Ridge, and the views up there were simply stunning. We did take our sweet time driving up to Hurricane Ridge, and by the time we did get there and I got my cameras out, the evening light was really starting to hit, and fortunately I did have that Fuji Reala 100 still in my Mamiya, and then in my Pentax some Ektar 100. One awesome thing about Hurricane Ridge is that there's a boatload of deer up there, and it was just a fun opportunity to get in some nice compositions with the Olympic Mountains in the background, a buck in the foreground, and during this time I did switch from Ektar 100 to Gold 200 simply because it was the first roll I could find in my bag. After frolicking with the deer, I did decide to hit the trail at Hurricane Hill to the very top for sunset, and it is a nice little paved path, so nothing too strenuous. At this point, you can probably tell that the golden light was really starting to hit, so I did switch out that gold 200 for some primo Portra 400. Even if Portra doesn't deliver the punchiest of greens, I still think it does deliver in situations like this in the evening. And it's also nice just to have a 400 ISO film so I can shoot handheld still, because even at 200 ISO with gold, I'm really pushing it. Just as the light was reaching insane levels of golden, a doe and her fawns decided to give us a nice evening greeting. More than anything, I'm surprised that the Pentax KX shutter didn't cause a mama deer to bum rush me and trample me to death. I'll just save that fate for another day. Also, to get back some deer karma, I did take a photo of this nice couple taking in that stunning view. So yeah, this photo is going to be hard to beat as the number one for this whole trip. The lighting is simply incredible, and I'm really happy with the exposure, I'm happy with the composition. And from this view, Hurricane Ridge honestly looks like Mount Tamalpais in the Bay Area, but I don't think that's a view that Washingtonians would share with me, honestly. And with this photo, pretty much ran out of film for the day, and I was really just starving, the sun was pretty much gone, so we decided just to scurry back down the hill into the comfort of our motel bed. Overall, day 5 really just felt short but sweet. I had that nice evening of shooting on Hurricane Ridge, and I'm pretty happy with the compositions, with the exposures, and with the gear and film that I chose. And for the most part, I really felt like I was hitting a stride at this point in the trip, just making the right decisions to get the photos I want. But me being me, of course, I decided for day 6 that I would change it up. Early in the morning on day 6, we found ourselves sailing the salty seas, bound for the British Columbian capital, Victoria. We really had lucked out once again with the skies being as crystal clear as they were, and somehow Canadian Customs didn't notice me smuggling in some valuable antiques. The antiques I'm talking about, of course, is an old Pentax KX 35mm SLR and some old expired Fuji Superia 400. I really haven't mentioned this camera much on the trip because I actually picked it up on the first day driving by Mount Shasta from someone in Facebook Marketplace, so that was a nice deal. And at this point, I just thought it'd be a nice light camera to change things up with for the day, and I think you'll see that it was a good choice. During the course of the day, I did have a thoroughly fantastic time in Victoria. I did some sightseeing, quenched my thirst dealing with that oppressive British Columbia heat, and I did take some photos. Wasn't a metric ton of photos, I do feel happy with the photos themselves, the compositions, the exposure, and so on and so forth. Some compositions definitely ended up being more Canadian than others, I do reckon, and these later photos, in particular the Capitol building, turned out quite well. Like countless others, I used to shoot a bunch of Fuji Superia back in the day as a beginner, so it felt nice to go back to the basics with this. The fun with the Superia didn't stop there though, as we were blessed with perfect evening light on the ferry back to Washington. Shooting golden hour in the Puget Sound area has always been on my bucket list for a long time. It felt like a great scenario just to make those stars align. As much as the Pentax 6.7 would have kicked ass in this scenario, having that Pentax LX and a 35mm lens really felt like the move. I really lucked out with how much film I brought for this little day trip because I shot my last photo just as the sun was setting. And for the most part, I'd say it's a really great day in British Columbia, just taking in the sights, the food, the drinks, and of course getting in some great photos in the end, photos I'm really happy with. And now I can see really why those ferries in the Puget Sound area are so popular, because when you have that evening light like that, it's just like endless compositional possibilities. And now I just really want to come back to that area and try it again. In any case, the fun doesn't stop there, and we have plenty more to do the next day. The next day marked a full week on the road, and we really had a lot of ground to cover, going from the Olympic Peninsula all the way to the foot of Mount St. Helens. The first stop was in the Hoh Rainforest, or however you pronounce it, and for the most part there was a lot more forest and not so much rain. To capture some of those punchy greens in the rainforest, I did load up some Ektar 100 once again, and stuck with the Fuji Reala in my Mamiya. Although I'm glad to get those vibrant colors from the Ektar, I will say the dappled light did create some really strong contrast. At this point, Ektar can barely handle the highlights, but I still don't regret bringing that film along either way. I gotta say, this is a composition I'm a big fan of. The photo turned out just as I wanted it, and the highlights in the corner don't do too much to distract from the main subject. Going forward, I really wanted to capture more intimate landscapes like this, but the chaos of the rainforest does make it a little bit of a challenge. Here's another composition that I like quite a bit, and even with that dappled light, I think the photo turned out pretty well. Somehow Ektar was able to barely handle the highlights, and for that I am grateful. After having a blast shooting in the Hoh Rainforest, we did have to start skedaddling our way down south. Along the way, we did stop a couple times along the coast, and it was absolutely gorgeous. Unfortunately, it was super crowded at the beach, so I did have a hard time finding those empty landscape compositions. After stopping at the beaches along the Olympic Peninsula, we still had a lot of ground to cover, and we're actually going in the direction of Portland, so we had time for one more hike in the evening, basically, and that hike was at Mount St. Helens. Ever since I was a little kid, pretty much I've been obsessed with the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. Just the sheer scale of it, we were talking thousands of feet of mountain just going down all at once, causing a pyroclastic flow and flattening trees as far as the eye can see. Just an absolute insane scale of destruction. And I think when you see the photos, when you read about it, it really it speaks to you. But seeing it in person, that's a whole different level of experience I really wanted to have. So I'm glad we got out there finally. With that being said, the eruption was 40 plus years ago, so there was a significant bit of recovery since then. As I hit the trail, I did load up some Gold 200 in the Pentax KX. And the first photo turned out quite nice if you ask me, although it definitely doesn't look like a landscape that was decimated 40 years ago. It didn't take long after for us to get out into the open, and man was the view gorgeous. It was crazy just to walk through all that ash that was there and even see a fair bit of the trees that were knocked down from that pyroclastic flow. Of course, I did have to try and cram in one of these downed trees into the composition. As the sun started to creep below the horizon, I did run into a few more deer, and this has just been a real deer heavy trip, so it's only fitting that the last photos really were also of deer. And with that, I officially wrapped up the photography section of my trip. Overall, it was a pretty active day, and it brought me all the way from the rainforest up in the Olympic Peninsula, and I finished it on a barren ash flow at Mount St. Helens. So a lot of diversity there for one day, and overall, I'm just happy with the photos in general. The next day was nothing special for the most part. We made the long slog all the way through Oregon and down into California, but along the way, I did make a stop at the legendary Blue Moon camera. And yeah, as someone who has to buy all of their film and chemistry online, going to this place was amazing, and I do feel a lot poorer as a result. So in the end, what is there to say about a full week-long road trip where you shoot 30 plus rolls of exposed film? That's a lot for me, by the way. Other than it was a huge success. I had a few drinks, climbed a few hills, and shot a whole lot of panos with that Mamiya 6. And overall, between that Mamiya 6 and the Pentax KX, which I really gave some heavy usage, I gotta say I'm happy with my choice. It's a really great combination. And going forward, I'm really gonna have to consider just sticking with those two cameras in general when I'm doing a big road trip or doing whatever. So to sum things up, I'll just say I had a great time in the Pacific Northwest. And I feel like I only really scratched the bare surface of what that area has to offer. And that's more of a blessing than a curse. So I'm looking forward to making another trip out there sometime in the future.